I never thought I would have to explain to a grown woman why stealing emergency rescue equipment is both illegal and potentially deadly. But there I was on a Tuesday afternoon, watching Susan Patterson march across my driveway with her arms full of my thermal emergency blankets, like she had just won the lottery at a garage sale. I had just gotten back from a brutal 3-day search operation in the Cascade Mountains near Stevens Pass, Washington, where a family of 4 had gotten lost during what was supposed to be a simple day hike. We found them, thank God, but it had taken every ounce of energy I had left. My muscles ached, my eyes burned from lack of sleep, and all I wanted was to unload my gear, take a shower hot enough to steam the exhaustion out of my bones, and collapse into bed for about 12 hours straight. Instead, I was standing in my driveway in the suburban neighborhood of Redmond, watching the HOA president help herself to equipment that did not belong to her. "Excuse me," I called out, my voice rough from days of shouting coordinates across mountain ridges. "Those are mine." Susan turned around with that particular expression I had come to know well over the 2 years I had lived in Riverside Meadows subdivision. It was the look of someone who believed that her position as HOA president gave her divine authority over every blade of grass, every mailbox, and apparently every piece of personal property within a 3-mile radius. She was in her mid-50s, with the kind of severe haircut that screamed, "I want to speak to your manager," and a pantsuit that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. "Mr. Daniels," she said, managing to make my name sound like an accusation, "I am confiscating these blankets as they are in violation of HOA Regulation 47, subsection C, which clearly states that no homeowner shall store unsightly materials in plain view of the street or neighboring properties." I blinked at her, trying to process what she had just said through the fog of exhaustion. "Susan, those blankets were in my garage. You went into my garage. Your garage door was open," she replied, as if that explained everything. "And these orange eyesores were visible from the street. Mrs. Henderson called me this morning in absolute distress. She said it looked like you were running some kind of homeless shelter out of your home." I took a deep breath, reminding myself that I was too tired to deal with this properly. First of all, those blankets are property of King County Search and Rescue. Second, they are emergency equipment. Third, you cannot just walk into someone's garage and take their things. That is called theft. Susan's eyes narrowed. "I am the HOA president, Mr. Daniels. I have every right to enforce our community standards. These blankets are being temporarily removed until you can provide proper storage that meets HOA guidelines. You will find them in the community center storage room, and you may retrieve them once you have submitted a formal storage plan for approval." She turned on her heel and continued walking toward her white Lexus SUV, which was parked at the end of my driveway with the kind of entitled precision that blocked my mailbox. The bright orange emergency blankets, each one clearly marked with property of King County Search and Rescue in bold black letters across the side, were piled in her arms like she was carrying laundry. "Susan, stop," I said, my patience evaporating. I walked toward her, every step reminding me of the miles I had hiked through snow and ice. "You need to put those back. Now." "I will do no such thing," she said, opening her trunk. "And if you continue to harass me, I will be forced to fine you for aggressive behavior toward an HOA board member. That is $500 per incident, in case you have forgotten." I watched in disbelief as she loaded my emergency blankets into her trunk, each one representing potential life-saving equipment that I needed to return to the rescue station by Friday. We had another training exercise scheduled for the weekend, and these blankets were essential gear. They were not decorative items. They were not storage solutions for a home renovation project. They were specialized thermal blankets designed to prevent hypothermia in wilderness rescue situations. "Susan, those blankets are worth about $300 each," I said, trying to keep my voice level. "There are 12 of them in there. You are currently stealing about $3,600 worth of county property. Not to mention that I need those for a training exercise this weekend." She slammed her trunk closed with a satisfied smile. "Then you should have stored them properly, Mr. Daniels. Perhaps this will teach you to respect our community standards. Good day." She climbed into her Lexus and drove away, leaving me standing in my driveway with my mouth hanging open. I looked down at my phone, debating whether to call the police right then and there, but I was so exhausted that I could barely think straight. Maybe if I just explained the situation to her tomorrow, showed her the search and rescue identification I carried, she would understand the seriousness of what she had just done. I should have known better. That evening, after I had showered and tried to eat something that my stomach would actually accept, I sat down at my kitchen table and composed a calm, professional email to Susan. I explained that I was a certified volunteer with King County Search and Rescue, that the equipment she had confiscated was county property loaned to me for emergency response purposes, and that I needed it returned immediately. I attached photos of my credentials, a letter from the search and rescue coordinator, and even a copy of the state law that protected emergency responders from exactly this kind of interference. I sent the email at 8 p.m. By 8:15 p.m., I had a response. "Mr. Daniels, your extracurricular activities, while admirable, do not exempt you from HOA regulations. The blankets will remain in storage until you have submitted and received approval for a proper storage solution. As a reminder, the HOA board meets on the third Tuesday of each month, and storage plans typically require a 14 to 21-day review period. Additionally, you are being fined $200 for unauthorized use of garage space for commercial or professional equipment storage. Payment is due within 30 days. Regards, Susan Patterson, HOA President." I read the email 3 times, each time feeling my blood pressure rise a little higher. Commercial or professional equipment storage. I was a volunteer. I did not get paid for search and rescue work. I spent my weekends hiking through wilderness areas looking for lost hikers, injured climbers, and confused elderly people who had wandered away from their care facilities. I had saved lives. And now, I was being fined for storing the equipment that allowed me to do that work. I called my friend Marcus, who was also on the search and rescue team and who had dealt with his own share of HOA nonsense at his place in Bellevue. "Dude, she took your blankets," Marcus said, his voice rising in disbelief. "Like, just walked into your garage and took them." "Yep," I said, rubbing my eyes. "And now she is saying I cannot have them back until I submit a storage plan and wait 3 weeks for approval. We have training this weekend." "That is insane," Marcus said. "Did you tell her they are county property multiple times? She does not care. She thinks being HOA president means she can do whatever she wants." Marcus was quiet for a moment. "You know you can press charges, right? That is theft, straight-up theft, county property too, which makes it even worse." "I know," I said, "but I am trying to avoid making this a huge thing. I have to live here. The last thing I need is an HOA war." "Brother, she started the war when she stole your gear," Marcus said. "But I get it. Look, call the coordinator tomorrow. Let them know what happened. They might want to get county legal involved. This is not just about you. This is about access to emergency equipment." He was right, of course. This was not just a petty HOA dispute. This was about equipment that could mean the difference between life and death in an emergency situation. If there was a call-out this week and I did not have my gear, someone could suffer because of Susan's power trip. The next morning, I called Janet Rivera, the King County Search and Rescue Coordinator. Janet had been running the program for 15 years and had seen just about everything, but even she was stunned when I explained what had happened. "She took the blankets out of your garage," Janet said slowly, as if she could not quite believe what she was hearing. "And she is refusing to return county property." "That is correct," I said. "She claims they violate HOA regulations about visible storage." Janet was silent for a moment, and I could almost hear her mentally composing the phone call she was about to make. "Okay, here is what is going to happen," she said, her voice taking on the calm, authoritative tone she used during rescue operations. "I am going to contact county legal. They are going to draft a letter demanding the immediate return of county property. If this Susan person does not comply within 24 hours, we will file a police report for theft of government property. This is not negotiable. We cannot have HOAs interfering with emergency response equipment." "I appreciate that," I said, feeling a weight lift off my shoulders. "I just want my gear back so I can do my job." "You will have it back," Janet said firmly. "And Jackson, I want you to document everything. Every interaction, every email, every conversation. If this goes to court, we need a paper trail." That afternoon, I received an email from someone named David Chen in the county legal department. The email was professional, direct, and included an attached letter addressed to Susan Patterson. The letter, written on official King County letterhead, explained that the thermal blankets in question were property of King County Search and Rescue, that they were essential emergency response equipment, and that their immediate return was required under state law. The letter cited specific statutes about interference with emergency services, and ended with a polite but firm statement that failure to return the equipment within 24 hours would result in a formal police report and potential criminal charges. I forwarded the email to Susan with a brief note. "Please see the attached letter from King County Legal. I need the blankets returned by tomorrow afternoon. Thank you." Her response came an hour later. "Mr. Daniels, I have reviewed the letter from the county, and while I appreciate their concern, the HOA has its own legal authority within this community. The blankets will be returned according to our established procedures. I suggest you focus on finding compliant storage solutions rather than making threats. Additionally, you are now being fined an additional $300 for involving outside parties in an internal HOA matter. Regards, Susan Patterson." I stared at the email in disbelief. She was actually going to fight the county over blankets, and she was fining me for contacting the organization that owned the blankets. I forwarded the email to David Chen with a simple subject line: "She is refusing to comply." What happened next moved faster than I expected. David Chen apparently forwarded Susan's email to someone higher up in the county legal department, who then contacted the sheriff's office. By Thursday morning, I had a deputy sheriff named Rodriguez standing on my front porch, asking me to explain the situation. Deputy Rodriguez was in his late 30s, with the kind of calm demeanor that came from dealing with absurd situations on a regular basis. He listened to my story, took notes, and then asked to see the emails. I showed him everything on my phone, including Susan's most recent response. "So let me get this straight," Rodriguez said, scrolling through the emails. "She went into your garage without permission, took county property, is refusing to return it, and is now fining you for asking for it back." "That is correct," I said. Rodriguez shook his head slowly. I have been doing this for 12 years, and I have seen some wild HOA stories, but this might take the cake. Okay, here is what we are going to do. I am going to go talk to Miss Patterson. I am going to explain to her that she is currently in possession of stolen county property, and that she needs to return it immediately. If she refuses, I will arrest her for theft and interference with emergency services. Those are both serious charges. I do not want to ruin her life, I said, suddenly feeling guilty. I just want my gear back. I understand, Rodriguez said. And hopefully she will be reasonable once she understands the legal implications. But Mr. Daniels, what she did is not okay. You are a volunteer emergency responder. You save lives. The law protects people like you for a reason. She cannot just take your equipment because she does not like the way it looks. Rodriguez left, and I spent the next hour pacing around my house, wondering what was happening. I imagined Susan answering her door, acting indignant, maybe even calling her lawyer. I imagined her refusing to cooperate, getting arrested right there in her pristine white kitchen. Part of me felt bad for her. Part of me thought she deserved whatever consequences came her way. My phone rang. It was Rodriguez. Good news and bad news, he said. Good news is I have your blankets. Bad news is Miss Patterson is not happy about it. What happened? I asked. I explained the situation to her, Rodriguez said. She tried to argue that HOA rules superseded county authority. I explained that they do not. She threatened to call her lawyer. I told her to go ahead, but that in the meantime, she needed to return the county property or she would be arrested. She finally took me to the community center and opened the storage room. Your blankets are all there and they appear to be in good condition. I am going to swing by and drop them off in about 20 minutes. I felt relief wash over me. Thank you so much, Deputy. I really appreciate this. No problem, Rodriguez said. But I have to tell you, this is probably not over. Miss Patterson seems like the type to hold a grudge. You might want to consider documenting everything going forward, and if she tries anything else, call us immediately. He was right, of course. When Rodriguez showed up with my blankets, neatly folded and stacked in plastic bins he had apparently borrowed from the community center, he gave me his card and told me to call him directly if there were any more issues. I thanked him, brought the blankets inside, and spent the next hour checking each one to make sure they were undamaged. They were all fine, thank God, but the whole experience had left me rattled. Friday morning, I received an email from the HOA board. It was not from Susan, but from someone named Margaret Thornton, who identified herself as the HOA vice president. The email was surprisingly apologetic. Dear Mr. Daniels, on behalf of the HOA board, I want to apologize for the situation regarding your search and rescue equipment. It has come to our attention that President Patterson may have overstepped her authority in this matter. The board is currently reviewing the incident and will be addressing it internally. In the meantime, please know that you will not be charged any fines related to this situation, and your storage of emergency response equipment is exempt from standard HOA storage regulations. We appreciate your service to the community. Sincerely, Margaret Thornton, HOA Vice President. I read the email twice, surprised by the tone. It sounded like someone on the board had realized that Susan had created a potential legal nightmare for the entire HOA. I wrote back, thanking Margaret for her email and expressing hope that we could move forward constructively. That weekend, I drove up to the training site near North Bend, where our team was running a mock rescue operation in the foothills. Marcus met me at the parking area, grinning. "So I heard you had some excitement this week," he said. "You could say that," I replied, pulling the thermal blankets out of my truck. "But I got everything back. And the HOA Karen, Still breathing, unfortunately, I said, then felt immediately guilty. Sorry, that was harsh. I do not know what is going to happen to her. The vice president sent an apologetic email, so maybe they are dealing with it internally. The training exercise went well. We practiced cold weather survival techniques, worked on our navigation skills, and ran through several scenarios involving injured hikers. By Sunday evening, I was exhausted again, but it was the good kind of exhaustion that came from meaningful work. I drove home feeling grateful for my team, grateful for the opportunity to help people, and hopeful that the situation with Susan was behind me. Monday morning, I found out I was wrong. There was a letter taped to my front door when I left for work. It was on official HOA letterhead, and it was from Susan Patterson. The letter informed me that I was being fined $5,000 for filing a false police report against an HOA board member, defamation of character, and creating a hostile living environment. The letter went on to say that I had slandered Susan by involving the police in what should have been handled as an internal HOA matter, and that my actions had caused her emotional distress and reputational harm within the community. I stood on my front porch, reading the letter 3 times, feeling my anger build with each reading. This woman had stolen county property, refused to return it, and now she was trying to fine me $5,000 for getting it back through legal channels. I took a photo of the letter and immediately emailed it to David Chen at County Legal. Then I called Janet Rivera and told her what was happening. "She is fining you for what?" Janet said, her voice rising. "Jackson, this is harassment. This is retaliation. You need to file a complaint." "With who?" I asked. "With everyone," Janet said. "The police, county legal, maybe even the state attorney general's office. This woman is using her position in the HOA to punish you for recovering stolen property. That is abuse of power, and it might even be criminal." I spent the rest of the day making phone calls. I talked to David Chen, who was furious and promised to escalate the issue. I talked to Deputy Rodriguez, who told me to file a formal harassment complaint. I talked to a lawyer friend who specialized in HOA disputes, and she told me that Susan's behavior was so egregious that I probably had grounds for a civil lawsuit. By Tuesday, I had filed formal complaints with both the sheriff's office and the county. David Chen sent another letter to Susan, this time informing her that the $5,000 fine was invalid and that any attempt to collect it would be considered harassment and abuse of authority. The letter also informed her that the county was considering its own legal action against her for theft of government property and interference with emergency services. Wednesday morning, I received a knock on my door. It was Margaret Thornton, the HOA vice president. She looked uncomfortable. "Mr. Daniels, may I speak with you for a moment?" she asked. I invited her in, offering her coffee, which she declined. We sat in my living room, and she spent a moment gathering her thoughts before speaking. "I want to start by apologizing again for this entire situation," Margaret said. "The board had an emergency meeting last night, and we voted to remove Susan Patterson from her position as HOA president, effective immediately. We also voted to nullify all fines she issued to you. What she did was completely unacceptable." I felt a rush of satisfaction, followed quickly by curiosity. "What made you all decide to do that?" Margaret sighed. "Several things. First, we received a letter from the county threatening legal action against the HOA as an organization for Susan's actions. Our insurance company told us that if we did not take immediate corrective action, they would not cover any legal fees or judgments. Second, we found out that you were not the only person she had been targeting. There were 6 other homeowners who came forward with complaints about Susan's behavior over the past year. And third, Quite frankly, what she did was wrong. You are out there saving lives, and she stole your equipment because she thought it looked unsightly. That is not what our HOA is supposed to be about. I appreciate you telling me this, I said. And I appreciate the board taking action. Margaret nodded. There is one more thing. Susan is threatening to sue both you and the HOA. She claims that she was just doing her job and that we are scapegoating her. Our lawyer says her case is nonsense, but I wanted you to be aware. Of course she was going to sue, because that was exactly the kind of person Susan Patterson was. Someone who could not admit when she was wrong, someone who would rather burn everything down than accept responsibility for her actions. Let her sue, I said, surprised by the calm in my own voice. I have documented everything. I have emails, witness statements, and backing from the county. If she wants to take this to court, I am ready. Margaret looked relieved. The board will support you completely. And again, I am so sorry this happened. After Margaret left, I sat in my living room for a while, trying to process everything that had happened over the past week. I had gone from a routine equipment drop-off to a full-blown legal battle, all because one woman could not stand the sight of orange blankets in someone else's garage. It would have been funny if it was not so exhausting. Thursday afternoon, I got a call from Deputy Rodriguez. "Mr. Daniels, I wanted to give you an update," he said. "We have opened a formal investigation into Susan Patterson for theft and harassment. Based on the evidence you provided, along with statements from the county and other witnesses, we believe we have enough to press charges. The prosecutor's office is reviewing the case now." "Wow," I said. "I did not expect it to go this far." "These things have a way of escalating," Rodriguez said, "but honestly, she brought this on herself. She stole government property, refused to return it, and then tried to retaliate against you for reporting the theft. Those are serious offenses." Over the next few weeks, the situation continued to unfold in ways I never anticipated. The prosecutor's office decided to file charges against Susan for theft of government property and harassment. She was arrested at her home on a Tuesday morning, processed at the county jail, and released on bail the same day. The local news picked up the story, running a segment about an HOA president who stole emergency rescue equipment. The story went semi-viral on social media, with people across the country commenting on the absurdity of HOA overreach. Susan hired an expensive lawyer and tried to fight the charges. Her defense was that she was simply enforcing HOA rules and had no idea the blankets were county property, despite the fact that each one was clearly labeled. The prosecutor countered with emails showing that I had told her multiple times that they were search and rescue equipment, and that she had ignored those warnings. The judge was not sympathetic. The trial took place 4 months later, in November, at the King County Superior Court in Seattle. I took the day off work to attend, along with Janet Rivera and several other members of the search and rescue team. The courtroom was surprisingly full, with reporters, curious onlookers, and even a few of my neighbors from Riverside Meadows. Susan's lawyer tried to paint her as a dedicated community volunteer who had made an honest mistake in judgment. He argued that she had been trying to maintain property values and community standards, and that she had not intended to deprive anyone of emergency equipment. He presented character witnesses who testified that Susan was a devoted mother, a regular volunteer at her church, and someone who had worked tirelessly to improve the neighborhood. The prosecutor, a sharp woman in her 40s named Emily Santos, systematically dismantled every argument. She presented the emails showing Susan's repeated refusal to return the equipment. She showed the photos of the blankets, each one clearly marked as county property. She called Deputy Rodriguez to testify about Susan's behavior when he confronted her, and then she called me. I testified for about 30 minutes, explaining my role with search and rescue, describing how I had found Susan taking the blankets, and recounting our subsequent interactions. Emily Santos asked me to explain the importance of the thermal blankets in rescue operations. "These blankets can mean the difference between life and death," I said, looking directly at the jury. "When someone is lost in the wilderness, especially in cold weather, hypothermia is one of the biggest dangers. These thermal blankets are designed to reflect body heat and prevent heat loss. I have used them to save lives. The idea that someone would take them and refuse to return them because they did not like the way they looked is unconscionable." Susan's lawyer tried to argue that I could have simply gotten replacement blankets from the county, but I explained that there was a limited supply and that every blanket was accounted for. If I did not have my assigned equipment, it could delay response times or force another volunteer to work without full gear. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. They found Susan guilty of theft of government property and harassment. The judge sentenced her to 6 months in jail, suspended to 1 year of probation, 200 hours of community service, and ordered her to pay restitution to the county for the cost of recovering the equipment, which included the legal fees and Deputy Rodriguez's time. She was also ordered to attend anger management classes and was permanently barred from holding any position of authority in any HOA in Washington state. Susan stood silently as the sentence was read, her face pale. Her lawyer put a hand on her shoulder, but she shook it off. As the bailiff led her out of the courtroom, she turned and looked at me. For a moment I thought she might say something, but she just shook her head and walked away. After the trial, Emily Santos came over to shake my hand. "Justice served," she said with a smile. "And thank you for your service with search and rescue. We need more people like you." Janet Rivera gave me a hug. "I am proud of you for standing up to her," she said. "A lot of people would have just let it go." "I could not," I said. "This is too important." The civil lawsuit Susan had threatened never materialized. Her lawyer apparently convinced her that she had no case and that pursuing it would only result in more legal fees and potential countersuits. The HOA issued a formal apology to me and revised their regulations to explicitly exempt emergency response volunteers from certain storage restrictions. Life gradually returned to normal. Margaret Thornton was elected as the new HOA president, and she turned out to be reasonable and fair. I continued my work with search and rescue, responding to callouts, attending training exercises, and helping people in their worst moments. Every time I unfolded one of those orange thermal blankets and wrapped it around someone who was cold, scared, and grateful to be found, I thought about how close I had come to not having them available. 6 months after the trial, I was called out to a rescue operation near Lake Chelan. A teenage girl had gotten separated from her family during a camping trip and had spent the night alone in the woods. When we found her, she was hypothermic and in the early stages of shock. I wrapped her in one of the thermal blankets, the same one Susan had tried to confiscate, and stayed with her until the medical team arrived. She recovered fully, and her parents sent me a thank you card that I kept on my refrigerator for months. That rescue reminded me why I did this work. It was not about glory or recognition. It was about being there when someone needed help, about having the right equipment at the right time, and about being part of a community of people who cared more about saving lives than about property values or community standards. I ran into Susan Patterson one more time, about a year after the trial. I was at a grocery store in Redmond, pushing a cart through the produce section when I saw her examining apples. She looked older, tired. She saw me at the same time, and for a moment we just stood there, separated by a display of organic lettuce. I nodded at her. She nodded back. Neither of us said anything. There was nothing left to say. As I walked away, I thought about how a single decision, a single moment of stubborn pride had changed her life so dramatically. She had lost her position, her reputation, and her sense of authority, all because she could not see past her own narrow view of how things should be. I felt sorry for her, in a way, but I also felt grateful that the system had worked, that justice had been served, and that people like her could not simply abuse their power without consequences. That evening, I got a text from Marcus. There was a training exercise scheduled for the following weekend, and he wanted to know if I was available. I texted back immediately. Absolutely. Wouldn't miss it. I spent the rest of the week preparing my gear, checking equipment, and reviewing maps of the training area. Friday afternoon, I loaded my truck with everything I would need, including those thermal blankets. As I was finishing up, my neighbor Tom walked over from his house next door, heading out for another rescue thing, he asked. Training exercise, I said. But yeah, Tom smiled. You know, after everything that happened with Susan, a lot of us in the neighborhood started paying more attention to what you do. I looked up King County Search and Rescue online. The stories I read were incredible. I had no idea how much work you guys do. It is a good group, I said. We have a lot of dedicated people. Well, for what it is worth, I think what you do is amazing, Tom said. And I am glad you stood up to Susan. She needed someone to tell her no. After Tom went back to his house, I sat in my truck for a moment, reflecting on everything that had happened. The whole situation with Susan had been exhausting, frustrating, and at times infuriating. But it had also shown me that there were good people out there, people like Margaret Thornton and Deputy Rodriguez and Emily Santos, who were willing to stand up for what was right. It had shown me that systems could work when good people pushed them in the right direction. The training exercise that weekend was focused on advanced navigation techniques and night operations. We worked in teams of 3, navigating through dense forest in the dark using only compasses and topographic maps. It was challenging work, the kind that required complete focus and trust in your teammates. Around midnight, we stopped for a break on a ridge overlooking a valley bathed in moonlight. Marcus sat down next to me, pulling out a thermos of coffee. "You ever think about how weird our hobby is?" he asked. "What do you mean?" I said. "We spend our weekends hiking through the woods in the dark, practicing how to find lost people," he said. "Most people our age are at bars or watching Netflix," I laughed. "Yeah, I guess it is a little weird when you put it that way. But it matters," Marcus said, his tone becoming serious. "What we do actually matters. How many hobbies can you say that about?" He was right. This work mattered. Every training exercise, every equipment check, every hour spent studying maps and practicing techniques, all of it mattered because somewhere, someday, someone would need us. And when that call came, we would be ready. We finished the training exercise Sunday afternoon and drove back to the Seattle area. I was tired but satisfied, the good kind of tired that came from hard work well done. When I got home, I unloaded my gear carefully, checking each piece of equipment and noting anything that needed maintenance or replacement. The thermal blankets got folded and stacked in the garage, right where they belonged, clearly visible from the driveway. Monday morning, I went back to my regular job at a software company in downtown Seattle, where I worked as a project manager. My coworkers knew about my search and rescue work, and several of them had followed the story about Susan Patterson in the news. "You are famous," my colleague Deanne said when I walked into the office. "I saw you on TV." "Infamous, maybe," I said with a smile. "I would have preferred to avoid the whole situation." "But you stood up to her," Deanne said. "That took guts." "I have dealt with my own HOA nightmares, and I always just paid the fines and moved on. You actually fought back." "I did not really have a choice," I said. "She stole equipment that did not belong to me. If I had just let it go, I would have been failing in my responsibility to the county and to the rescue team." Over the following months, I received several messages through the search and rescue website from other volunteers around the country who had dealt with similar HOA issues. Some of them had been fined for having emergency vehicles in their driveways. Others had been threatened with fines for storing equipment in their garages. A few had even been forced to resign from their volunteer positions because their HOAs made it impossible to keep their gear at home. I responded to each message, sharing my experience and encouraging them to stand up for their rights. I connected several of them with David Chen at County Legal, who was able to provide guidance on how to handle HOA interference with emergency response activities. It became clear that this was a bigger issue than I had realized, and that Susan Patterson was far from the only HOA board member who believed that aesthetic concerns trumped public safety. Janet Rivera asked me to speak at a state-level search and rescue conference in Spokane about my experience. I was nervous about public speaking, but I agreed. The presentation took place on a Saturday morning in front of about 200 volunteers from across Washington state. I told my story, from the moment I saw Susan taking my blankets to the trial and its aftermath. I talked about the importance of knowing your rights, documenting everything, and refusing to be intimidated by people who abuse their authority. The response was overwhelming. During the question and answer session, at least a dozen people shared their own stories of HOA interference. One woman from Tacoma had been forced to park her emergency response vehicle 3 blocks from her house because her HOA claimed it violated their rules about commercial vehicles. A man from Olympia had been fined repeatedly for storing rescue equipment in his backyard shed. Another volunteer from Vancouver had actually been threatened with foreclosure because he refused to pay HOA fines related to his search and rescue work. After my presentation, several state legislators who were in attendance approached me about drafting legislation to protect emergency response volunteers from HOA overreach. One of them, a representative named Jennifer Morrison from the 48th District, was particularly passionate about the issue. "What happened to you should never have happened," she said. "Emergency responders, whether paid or volunteer, should be protected from this kind of harassment. I want to introduce a bill that explicitly exempts emergency response equipment and vehicles from HOA restrictions. Would you be willing to testify in support of it?" "Absolutely," I said. "Anything I can do to help." Over the next year, I became unexpectedly involved in the legislative process. Representative Morrison drafted a bill called the Emergency Responder Protection Act, which prohibited HOAs from restricting the storage of emergency response equipment or vehicles, provided they were stored in garages or other enclosed areas not visible from the street. The bill also established penalties for HOA board members who harassed or retaliated against emergency responders. I testified before the House Local Government Committee, telling my story again and answering questions from legislators. Some were sympathetic and supportive. Others worried about limiting HOA authority and setting a precedent for exemptions. But ultimately, the bill passed both the House and Senate with strong bipartisan support. The governor signed it into law in July, almost exactly 2 years after Susan Patterson had taken my blankets. The day the bill was signed, Janet Rivera called me. "You did it," she said, her voice full of pride. "You turned a terrible situation into something that is going to help volunteers across the entire state." "I had a lot of help," I said, "but yeah, it feels good." That summer, I was called out to one of the most challenging rescues of my career. A group of climbers had gotten into trouble on Mount Rainier, stranded at about 11,000 feet in deteriorating weather. The operation involved multiple agencies, including the National Park Service, the military, and several search and rescue teams from across the region. We spent 3 days on the mountain, fighting wind, snow, and exhaustion, but we brought everyone down safely. During the operation, I used those same orange thermal blankets that had started everything. I wrapped them around climbers who were hypothermic and exhausted, using them to stabilize patients until we could get them to lower elevations. Every time I unfolded one of those blankets, I thought about Susan Patterson and how close she had come to making them unavailable when they were needed most. After the rescue, I drove home in silence, too tired to even listen to music. But as I pulled into my driveway in Riverside Meadows, I felt a profound sense of gratitude. Gratitude for my team, gratitude for the legislators who had supported the new law, gratitude for the legal system that had held Susan accountable, and gratitude for the simple fact that I lived in a society where individuals could stand up to abuse of power and actually win. Margaret Thornton was outside watering her flowers when I got out of my truck. She waved and walked over. "I saw the news about the Rainier rescue," she said. "That was you up there." "Part of a big team," I said. "But yeah, you are amazing," she said. "And I am so sorry again about what Susan put you through. That never should have happened." "It worked out," I said. "And honestly, it led to some positive changes, so maybe it was worth it." Margaret smiled. "Well, the neighborhood is better off with you here. And I want you to know that the current board has your back. If you ever need anything, do not hesitate to ask." That evening, I sat on my back deck with a beer, watching the sun set over the Cascade Mountains. My dog, a German shepherd named Ranger who I had adopted a year earlier, lay at my feet. The air was warm, the sky was clear, and for the first time in a long time I felt completely at peace. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Heard about Rainier. Nice work. Beer this weekend," I texted back. "Absolutely. Your place or mine? Mine, I will grill." I smiled and set down my phone. Life was good. Not perfect, not easy, but good. I was doing work that mattered, surrounded by people who cared, and living in a place where justice could still prevail when people stood up for it. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, I thought about all the people I had helped over the years. The lost hikers, the injured climbers, the scared children, the confused elderly people. Each one of them was someone's loved one, someone important to someone else, and being there for them in their darkest moments was the greatest privilege of my life. Susan Patterson had tried to take that away from me, whether she understood it or not. She had tried to reduce life-saving equipment to an aesthetic problem, to treat public safety as less important than property values. But she had failed. And in failing, she had inadvertently helped create protections that would benefit emergency responders across the entire state. I raised my beer toward the mountains in a silent toast. To the rescues, to the volunteers, to the people who stood up for what was right. And yes, even to Susan Patterson, who had taught me that some battles are worth fighting, even when they seem small. Ranger lifted his head and looked at me, his tail wagging slightly. "What do you think, buddy?" I asked him. "Ready for another adventure?" His tail wagged harder, which I took as a yes. I finished my beer and went inside to check the search and rescue website for upcoming training opportunities. There was a rope rescue workshop in 2 weeks that looked interesting and a wilderness first aid refresher course the month after. I signed up for both. This was my life now. The regular job during the week, the rescue work on weekends, the constant training and preparation. It was not glamorous. It did not pay anything beyond the satisfaction of helping others. But it was mine, and I would not trade it for anything. As I got ready for bed that night, I checked my email one last time. There was a message from a woman in Oregon who had read about the Emergency Responder Protection Act and wanted advice on dealing with her own HOA situation. I wrote back, offering encouragement and connecting her with some resources. Then I saw an email from an address I did not recognize. The subject line was simply "Thank you." I opened it hesitantly, wondering if it was spam, but it was real. "Mr. Daniels, you do not know me, but I wanted to reach out and thank you. My daughter was one of the climbers you rescued on Mount Rainier last week. She called me from the hospital and told me how you wrapped her in a thermal blanket and stayed with her during the descent. She said you kept her calm and made her feel safe. I cannot imagine what would have happened if you were not there. I read about your situation with the HOA and the work you did to pass the new law. Thank you for fighting to keep doing this important work. Thank you for being there when my daughter needed you. You are a hero, whether you think of yourself that way or not. With deepest gratitude, Patricia Henderson." I read the email 3 times, feeling emotion well up in my chest. This was why I did this work, not for recognition or praise, but for moments like this, for the knowledge that what I did mattered to real people with real lives. I wrote back, thanking Patricia for her message and wishing her daughter a full recovery. Then I closed my laptop and turned off the lights. Tomorrow would be another day. More work, more challenges, more opportunities to help people. And I would be ready, with my equipment properly stored in my garage, protected by law from anyone who thought property values were more important than saving lives. As I drifted off to sleep, I smiled. It had been a long, strange journey from that Tuesday afternoon, when Susan Patterson had walked across my driveway with her arms full of orange blankets. But I had come through it stronger, wiser, and more committed than ever to the work I loved. And those blankets, those bright orange thermal blankets clearly marked property of King County Search and Rescue, were right where they belonged, ready for the next call, the next rescue, the next life that needed saving. That was all that mattered.